Welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together. This episode is all about the rock pigeon. We had a listener write in and ask us to do an episode on pigeons, and we're so happy that they did. I see pigeons all the time around the city in Chicago, but had no idea how fascinating they are. Our co-hosts John Bates and Shannon Hackett teach us all about these birds, and Jacob Drucker joins us today as well. One incredible thing about pigeons is their navigational capacity, their ability to travel long distances and get back to a specific point. They can navigate unlike any other bird. So much so that people use pigeons to pass messages in wars. In World War I and World War II, there were actually 32 pigeons awarded medals for their contributions. One pigeon, Spike, flew 52 missions without a single wound. Soldiers began to realize that pigeons were passing messages and would try and shoot them down when they'd see them flying overhead. Another pigeon, Cher Ami, lost his foot and his eye, but his message still got through, saving a large group of American infantrymen. Thanks to Spike, Cher Ami, and all the other pigeons for their service. We'll talk about all their different navigation methods, the impact that humans have had on rock pigeons, and much more in this week's episode. We start off talking a little bit about our trip to the Shed Aquarium, so hang with us for a moment, and then we'll get into the rock pigeon. Alright, go grab your binoculars, and let's get started.
Shed Aquarium like the next morning, and we saw the penguins there. Like, I think there was 2 or 3 types of penguins. I can't remember. Maybe two.
Yeah.
But there was like one duck.
Yeah.
Do you remember what kind of duck it
I
was?
don't remember what kind it was. We were like, did he get in here on accident?
Yes, it was so weird. He was like in a fish exhibit, obviously, and there was like this one duck.
I wonder what yeah.
Do you guys know that duck?
No, I know. Now I got to go to the shed.
Yeah. Did it have
Work on my-
blue feet?
I think it did.
Oh, I bet it was a ruddy duck.
Yeah. That's what it
Oh,
was.
that sounds
It was a
right.
ruddy duck.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Just
like,
one.
No
Yeah.
idea why.
Yeah.
And we were excited. We were like,
It's a
we're
lonely
going to go
duck.
try to find more and see if they're in other exhibits. But it was
Yes.
literally just the one duck in the
One
whole.
duck. Yeah. Yeah.
I bet it was a rehab bird.
Oh,
probably-
that's
interesting.
Cool.
Okay.
That'd be a cool place.
that's
to
neat. I
read.
mean, it's a good choice because they're nice and bright, and it'd be fun to watch them dive.
Yeah.
So that's that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we had a listener write in and ask if we would do an episode all about pigeons. So today we're going to talk about the rock pigeon, which I wasn't super familiar with aside from seeing them all over the place in the cities. So I'm excited to talk to you and kind of learn a little bit more.
So they're like the silent things then. You see them every day and you go by them every day and you don't think anything about them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so they all look so different too, which is something that I was always kind of curious about. Like, I feel like they all, I don't know, there's certain birds that all look similar. Pigeons have a lot of different kind of looks. So I
That's
kind of was
because
curious
of
about
humans.
that. It is?
There's natural variation that humans have exploited in captivity. So because they did. And that's basically, they were bred to have all of these different colors.
And that goes back thousands of years. So these birds are native,
Not here. They're
To-
not native to North America.
to Eastern Europe and Western Asia, coming down into the Middle East, and that's kind of the cradle of human civilization. And so pigeons have been part of that interaction with humans and been commensals for a long period of time in that part of the world. And I think as you're doing that, what you end up with the capacity to do, and humans seem very good with that, is just like you see with dogs and cats, humans have been able
Parrots.
to just create all kinds of different types. And it's even stranger when you get into the groups of parrots that are parrots. Now you got me thinking about parrots.
It's my fault.
No, you got these pigeons that are like, they're rollers and tumblers, and just all kinds of bizarre breeds of parrots that have been parrots. God, all kinds of bizarre
my fault.
breeds of doves
It's my fault.
that have been created, through captive breeding of and artificial selection by humans.
It's interesting to me that they just kind of fade into the background for you. Do they fade in the background for you, Jacob? Do you think about them when you see them?
I do.
I do too.
I do. one of my early bird experiences was hanging out with the guy feeding pigeons in the park.
Aww.
But except, he was different from, I would guess, your typical pigeon feeder in the park. From that, he refused to name any of them. He gave males numbers and females letters. And, so then, but that made you cue in on body size and the size of the cere, so that little bare patch of skin that they have at the base of their beak that you can use to tell them apart. So that was an early formative experience for little baby Jacob.
So how do you tell the difference between a male and a female of pigeons then?
It's those two, as far as I understand, it's mostly those two things.
Those two
it's
things.
body size and the size of the cere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. So, I think one of the things, they do kind of fade in the background for me, but hopefully learning more about them, I'm going to start paying more attention to them.
Oh, you definitely will.
Yeah.
Because, they're an incredible success story of, talk about exploiting the environments that they've been put in. Again, another thing that came back and forth through the Columbian Exchange, just like turkeys. And from there, they've commensal with humans. They're everywhere. But, the native one is that kind of bluish, grayish thing with the two black stripes on the wings. And you made me go down rabbit holes again with rock. I can't remember who it was that asked us to do an episode, but you can.
Oh, I think her name was Ariana.
Okay, Ariana. Yeah. It took me down a very long but interesting pathway on how so much variation gets made and how colors are made in rock doves. And I think that plays a large role in why people could make so many different colors. And some of it is fairly simple. Few genes with dominance and that cause varying wing patterns and that cause varying colors, whether you're black or gray or have that reddy colors or white. And the body color things is sex-linked. So sex-linked and mostly dominant, although not completely dominant. And the wing bar things are dominant too. And so some have wing bars, some are mottled, some are white. They don't. And they apparently, when you breed them, because their color system is slightly simpler than maybe some of the other birds, that you're capable of getting the full range of mottled whites and browns and all of these crazy things that you see so much in these populations that are so much around people. And a lot of people of buildings hate them, right? Because their poop is not very good for for bricks and metal. It's extremely corrosive. So I imagine they're the bane of a lot of building people's existence, and certainly for cities, trying to keep them off of bridges, and which is a common place for them to be nesting under overpasses and in bridges. So they're not nesting on their ledges like they historically did. They're finding the human equivalents of all of that, building ledges underneath.
They love bridges. No, one of the things I think is interesting about them is any urban structure. So you get out in the countryside, and if there are corn silos, there's food, there's shelter and structure for them, and so that they're an amazing, successful bird. I wanted to bring up one of the things that Jacob pointed out to me a long time ago, birding in the Chicago region, which is that you've kind of got pigeons of different types. So in other words, you've got the feral pigeons that are breeding in the parks and things, and then you've got a whole bunch of racing pigeons that are actually owned by somebody. And so a lot of times you could see a flock of pigeons go over, and it may not be entirely obvious what they are, but they could be actually somebody's captive pigeons that they're literally let fly around and are used in a whole passion of racing pigeons.
And so
That's super cool.
I've kind of have heard a little bit about people using them to pass notes, to race and things like that. How's that looked upon in the birding community? Is that a okay thing to do, or is that?
Again, I think pigeons have a special place because they've been associated with humans for so long that it's kind of
maybe
like
more than 5,000 years. That's a really long time that humans have been manipulating them. I mean, Darwin had them.
Oh, yeah.
But from a research subject, they're really fascinating with respect to this navigational capacity. So how does that work? And people have done all kinds of really fascinating homing experiences where they're doing things like putting contact lenses over the bird's eyes so that they can't see, and yet they can still navigate back to their roosts from kilometers away.
I think I read like up to 1,000 miles or something like that they can find their way back, which is like from here to Orlando, or it's like they can fly all the way across the country.
Crazy.
Jacob and I were talking about this. One of the more interesting news stories I've heard, it was a weekend thing on National Public Radio where a guy published a paper saying that 2 different pigeon races were completely disrupted in a situation where like hundreds of pigeons were released and almost none of them came home right away. And he actually did a bunch of research, and he figured out that one of the things that happened was the Concorde, which is a supersonic plane, had actually landed. One of these places was Philadelphia, and then crossing the English Channel. And in both cases, the Concorde had actually landed right around that time. And his argument was that pigeons were using infrasound, so completely different levels of sound that I'd ever thought about before to help navigate.
So that just disoriented
It just
them.
completely disoriented them.
Wow.
And pigeons have been incredibly important in this field of sensory biology in terms of like how birds
They use magnetic
perceive things.
fields to figure out where they are. They can smell,
Wow.
which we didn't used to think birds could smell very much, but now that we know a little bit more about bird brains, we know that the olfactory parts of their brain are better developed than we have historically thought, so that smell is more important than we might think for birds. So they're amazing. One of my first encounters, I went to Europe in high school, and we went to Italy, and then Italy and Greece, and we were at the Vatican. I got out of the bus, and a pigeon pooped on my head. Yeah.
That's good luck.
It's good
Welcome
luck.
to Italy.
Good luck. Yes.
Have you been pooped on by a pigeon?
I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Have you?
No.
Jacob, have you heard that being pooped on by a bird is good luck?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, us too.
Yeah.
You have to
What
say,
happened then? I'm not rich.
You found John.
I did.
Yeah.
That was lucky. You're right. That's
So,
actually fair. I am lucky.
so as far as like navigating then, so if it's the using like, I don't know, the Earth's magnetism, smell, is it kind of, people think it's a combination of all of these different factors that they're using and putting them all together, or
And manipulating them, like taking one out and seeing how that affects things. And so and it's just it's and they're incredibly good at it, and even probably better than most other birds, which is another reason why they started being used is for carrying messages and things, because they were incredibly dependable.
Yeah, there's no doubt those innate skills are what enabled them to be so prized by people that they're going to domesticate them for so long. They must have been pretty obvious to the first people who thought about doing things. That
See, I still think they were just, again,
pigeons.
like turkeys, they were kind of big and good to eat. Initially. Like
Maybe.
the first people were like,
Not if they're around humans so much, but I guess the world wasn't as dirty then. I'm not sure I'd be eating too many pigeons from around here.
pigeons are another bird where I'm always fascinated. So in general, that family, Columbidae, lays clutches of 2 eggs. And so you would not think that's a lot of reproductive output to keep yourself going. And yet pigeons clearly, and then their young are actually altricial, so they grow without, they're born without being able to move around, and they have to be raised by the adults, and it just doesn't seem to me that initially, if I look at their biology, to think this is a bird that could actually be all over the world and do incredibly well in any situation.
Apparently they nest 5 to 7 times a year.
That's a big thing, actually.
Okay.
They must be very cold tolerant from the nesting perspective, because they're nesting at the edges of the distribution of when a naked, I don't know if you've ever seen a naked pigeon, but they don't look like they could survive for very long without a lot of help. But they clearly can, because it's really cold at the beginning and the ends of their breeding season. Wouldn't surprise me if it were a warm winter in January that they tried to nest then too.
Wow.
I would venture to guess that artificial light plays a role in that too.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you go into the Birds of North America, or actually now Birds of the World pages, so for instance, the Cornell lab has species accounts for a lot of birds, particularly North American birds, but they have these annual these rings with the 12 months of the year around the outside, and they're trying to indicate what the birds are doing. And Shannon's right, breeding is going on something like 10 to 11 months out of the year.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
So they're incredibly, and if you think about that, that's including in cities that are not particularly warm for many parts of the year.
Yeah.
So,
And they don't seem particularly can they evade predators very well? I feel like people can walk right up and
I know.
I could touch one if I wanted to.
No, you couldn't.
So there's
really?
there's that's an interesting aspect. One of the things I wanted to bring up was, if you watch them fly, they are incredibly maneuverable.
Okay.
And that's actually something that's been researched too, where they've taken them into aviaries and done things like put piano wire up, and they can show these high-speed videos of them just navigating through incredible mazes of stuff. I mean, they're really good at evading.
You'd be surprised at how fast they would, and gracefully, they would get away from. They obviously are confident in that skill, because they have to be.
Bold.
They're around people all the time.
Yeah.
If they got startled all the time, they wouldn't be in cities. The way they are. So here's my bizarre fun fact, which is that in captivity, there was one, the bird's name was Levi, lived to be 31 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
31?
That's how old I am.
Well, I'm a lot older than that.
So I think I went and picked one up from someone on the north side that they had picked it up outside a bar and raised it, and I think it was 25 years old or something.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible.
Wow.
I mean,
I've got a personal connection to pigeons, which is that pigeons produce crop milk, and crop milk is something which is sloughing off of cells. It's not milk, but it's controlled by this hormone called prolactin. And my grandfather was actually one of the people who actually figured out that what prolactin was back in the 1950s or so.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
we talked about crop milk in the bloodsuckers.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Flamingos?
Because of flamingos and the
That's
fact
right.
that it's red.
Yes.
Not because of blood, but but yeah, crop milk is really quite an amazing thing. That's my guess is that that's one way in which they really provision their young well with high fats and good calories, and immune system boosts.
Yeah, that's
so that can make it tolerable to be in some pretty, living under a bridge in Chicago doesn't seem like the most healthy atmosphere for something under the train tracks. But I think that they can clearly survive that because crop milk gives them options. Not other pigeons are not doing that, right? So other things they're related to are not nearly as commensal with humans and all over cities in the same way.
Yeah, and that's something that Shannon's always bringing up, which is that these birds like house sparrows and starlings and pigeons, what is it about their basic biology that allows them to become commensal and then actually do as well as they do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there could be a lot of underlying reasons for that, and this is a good example that I hadn't even thought about.
I think immune systems likely, if I had to put my guessing hat on, I think immune systems likely play a large role in successful introduced species.
Shannon or John, do you have any innate or factual responses to the statement that pigeons are rats with wings regarding disease and immune systems?
I was going to say that rats are pigeons without wings.
Oh.
But
Pigeons are so much cooler. I mean, rats, I guess, when you see the rat carrying the pizza thing out of the subway, okay. But
so this is anecdotal, but I can't think of many. I can't think of any examples where people have talked about massive pigeon die-offs. Mm-hmm. Not that it. I mean, you'd think it would have to happen, and yet we know of ducks and geese and that clearly have diseases that come through, and pigeons seem to skate through some of that.
That made me think of something else super interesting. People in the museum, research associates professor at DePaul, has this study on rats, and there was on how they're connected in urban environments, how they're genetically connected. But I don't think anybody's ever done a study of. Have they?
People are working on it in New York. I haven't heard the results, but it's been going on for a few years.
So they're actually getting blood samples and to try to do some,
And it's hard to catch the pigeons.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They aren't.
Never would have thought.
No.
Yeah, I know.
I never tried.
So that's some corn and.
So what do you predict? How far do you think they go from where they're born to where they breed? I mean, how much genetic connectivity is there?
I would expect a lot, especially in somewhere like New York. I would expect connectivity from Portland, Maine, through Richmond, Virginia. Oh, wow. But I don't know. I think, I'd expect more gene flow in the areas where there's more agriculture, because that's where the birds have to travel further to forage. But, lots of other examples of systems where how far you go to forage doesn't have any relationship with what your gene flow looks like. So.
Someone needs to do that. We need to do that. I have a lot of admiration for pigeons, which is super weird, I know. But I like house sparrows too. So maybe I just introduce things. Starlings are pretty amazing too. None of those things should be nesting in native birds' nesting places, though, which is the unfortunate part.
From a genetic perspective, one of my all-time favorite papers looking at what can happen with artificial selection is a microsatellite study of pigeons, where they looked at all these different types of rollers and tumblers and broke them up, and there were probably something like 10 different categories that they looked at. And when you do that with microsatellites, you can put all the data into something called...
Why don't you tell people what a microsatellite is?
It's a genetic variant that allows you that evolves very fast, such that you can look at fine levels of population structure.
So a lot of microsatellites are how people identify criminals. That's the technology that's in those databases.
Okay.
Some of them now, but anyways.
And then you can basically use these algorithms that allow you to say, how many clusters are there? Like, how distinct are the groups in the sample that I have? And when you do that with these different breeds of pigeons that are all literally just things that have been artificially selected, and you can do this with dogs too, is you can actually begin to see the there's enough genetic distinctiveness for this algorithm that's grouping them to show them as being distinctive. And so in a sense, they're on a track that would eventually lead them to become different species.
Except humans will want to mix them up so that they can make
Oh.
some new bizarre variants.
Right.
So,
But coming back to what Shannon said, one of the things Shannon said earlier is the same study also looked at this microsatellite variation within a small sample of just regular pigeons. And what you see is that variation is kind of standing variation in modern pigeons that's just being selected out in these breeds that come down. And that's the same thing that happens in dogs and cats. Is people like Siamese traits and they continue to breed them that way. but it's not really leading to speciation. It's just leading to differentiation that's segregated across the populations, which, again, it's just pigeons are pretty amazing with respect to the amount of standing variation that they have out there.
They're deserving of more study.
Are all pigeons derived then from a pigeon that was at one point domestic?
It was probably a group of them that were domesticated.
Okay, yeah.
And then their utility for humans was pretty obvious. And so then they spread like all over the world.
But again, the family Columbidae and the subgroup in the genus Columba, which is what Columba livia, rock pigeon, belongs to, is pretty widespread. And so, again, I think it's not there's good reason to think that the reason why Columba livia was what was brought into captivity was because it was the common pigeon around this area where civilization was actually beginning to sort of come into play for humans.
Do you think they might be the most common bird in the
they're
the most numerous bird in the world?
No, but they're up there.
I don't know.
Alder flycatcher.
No, come on.
No, I don't know, because they're pretty, they're common in cities, but outside cities they're really not that common. And even within cities, I mean, here in Chicago I see way fewer than I do in New York. If I want to see a pigeon in Hyde Park in my neighborhood, I have to work a little harder and keep track. You don't just see them walking around like you do in the Loop or like you do, in New York City. It's way easier to see more. I think Christmas count numbers could be revealing. And you don't see them, if you don't see them transiting between places very often either.
Do you think starlings are more numerous?
Absolutely.
House sparrows more numerous?
I would say it's a toss-up between house sparrow and rock pigeon. Probably house sparrow more, and then European starling, I would guess. Takes the cake, but that's all.
All right. Well, should we get into a mailbag question before we wrap it up here? So this is from Ariana as well. She sent a list of a bunch of questions, so we're going to answer another one of hers. So she said, I've started noticing stray feathers way more lately. When you all find a bird feather on a walk, do you ever collect it or keep it? Is there an easy way to discern the size of bird or type of bird by a stray feather? Where the stray feather may have come from.
That's what museums are really good for, because we have samples of all the feathers. So, yeah, when you get good at it, you can find a feather on the ground and pick it up and you know what species it is. And often you even know whether it's a male or a female bird, depending on the feather. But there are some people who are super good at that. Dave Willard, our retired collections manager, you can give him virtually anything, he could tell you what it came from, because he's touched every bird in our collection. So he's seen all of the feathers up close. But unfortunately, we have to tell people that if it's a native migratory bird, it is illegal for you to possess their parts, and that includes feathers that have fallen on the ground. And there are laws that were put in place to preserve birds that were being hunted to extinction, almost to extinction, for their feathers to be put in women's hats, for example. So there's laws, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and you can't save these feathers.
Oh,
but,
okay.
Yeah, you can tell what they are. Jacob and John are going to be way better at it than me.
Well, people send us pictures all the time. And, the other thing is there's some good online resources now where people have put up feathers. One of the things that I'm always amazed by is the amount of variation, not the types and variety of feathers is astounding across all birds. So like if you take a turkey, for instance, and you plucked every feather, one, there would be an awful lot of feathers on that bird. But two, the variation across that feather going from wing feathers to tail feathers to back feathers is really amazing. So, if it's a little brown bird and you've got a secondary, which is one of the feathers in the towards the base of the wing, it can be a little bit hard to tell apart.
But comparative material is going to help you, right? So if you can go into the collections with that feather, you can, if your collections are big enough, you can compare that feather to all the other feathers that you see. And And if they're distinctive, you'll be able to figure that out.
There's literally a feather sitting on the bench in the prep lab at the museum right now that was brought in, and Dave wasn't sure what it was.
Ooh, that's
and
surprising.
It's got an interesting notch in the top, and so it's the neat thing about feathers too is, you know, it's a primary, and it's got a notch in the top that is definitely going to be diagnostic as something. But, you know, we were thinking, well, maybe bald eagle, maybe turkey vulture, maybe sandhill crane. And so, you know, it's a fun thing to look at, and I would encourage people. Shannon's right. You're technically not allowed to have them, but you get a picture and you can get on the web and look it up.
You can also become a Field Museum member, and if you come behind the scenes on Members Night, we have on one of the cases, we have a whole bunch of common bird feathers that are there, so you can kind of take a look at what a feather looks like isolated.
Oh, cool.
Cool.
Like that. And we have an ID day once a year. Now that COVID's winding a bit away, we started ID Day up where people can bring feathers, pictures of feathers, and have us identify them.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Or not.
Or not.
Or not.
In my case, it's
Stump
the
the
or
expert. Putative expert.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to call it for this one. John, you want to close it out?
Yeah. Birds of a feather. I mean, we were just talking about feathers. Yeah. Keep listening to our podcast.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you have a question for John, Shannon, Amanda, and I, feel free to send it to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com or reach out to us on Instagram. We appreciate all of the bird brains out there for reaching out. Thanks to Earhole Studios. Shout out to Adam and Daniel for helping us record. And join us next week for a brand new episode.